Forbidden Seat. Miguel Reyes never considered himself a superstitious man. But on his third day working at the San Luis Potosi bus terminal, he witnessed something that would forever change his perspective on the thin veil between worlds. As he handed a ticket to an elderly woman, movement caught his eye through the terminal window. A man in a cowboy hat sitting in seat 12 of the departing Monterey bus seemed to flicker like an old television, then vanished entirely while the bus remained in motion. Miguel blinked, convinced his mind was playing tricks after hours of staring at computer screens. "Did you just see?" he began to ask his supervisor Carlos, but stopped when he saw the older man's ashen face. "Rule number 1 at this terminal, Miguel," Carlos said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Never under any circumstances sell seat 12 on the night route to Monterey, no matter what." Miguel nodded, not understanding, but sensing the gravity in Carlos's voice. It would be weeks before he learned the full story behind the rule, and months before he discovered the price of breaking it, a price paid not just in lives but in souls trapped between destinations. The San Luis Potosi Central de Autobuses wasn't the largest or most modern in Mexico, but it served its purpose well, connecting travelers to destinations across the country and into the United States. Miguel quickly learned the rhythms of the place, the morning rush of business travelers, the afternoon lull, and the evening surge of overnight passengers seeking cheaper fares. Carlos Mendoza, the night shift supervisor, took Miguel under his wing. A veteran of 25 years at the terminal, Carlos knew every route, every driver, and, as Miguel would discover, every ghost story associated with the building. "You're doing well," Carlos said one evening as they shared coffee in the break room. "Just remember the protocols, especially about seat 12. "About that," Miguel ventured. "Is it some kind of company policy, a technical issue with the booking system?" Carlos stared into his coffee. "It's more than that. It's tradition. Respect." He glanced at the clock. "My shift ends in 20 minutes. Meet me at Café Dona Rosa across the street afterward. Some things shouldn't be discussed here." An hour later, they sat in a corner booth of the nearly empty cafe. Carlos looked over his shoulder before speaking. "It happened 30 years ago," he began. "There was a young man named Diego Santana, 28 years old, engaged to a beautiful girl from Monterey. He worked here in San Luis Potosi, but traveled every weekend to see her. Always took the night bus, always sat in seat 12. Said it was his lucky number." Carlos took a sip of his coffee. "One night there was a terrible storm. Management recommended postponing the trip, but Diego insisted on going. The driver, Ricardo, had become friends with Diego over the months and agreed to make the journey despite the weather. They left at midnight. "Let me guess," Miguel said. "They never arrived." Carlos nodded solemnly. "The bus crashed at Matehuala Pass, went right off the cliff. Diego and Ricardo died instantly. It was ruled an accident blamed on the weather and dangerous roads." "That's tragic," Miguel said, "but why the rule about seat 12 inches?" "Because after the accident, strange things started happening on that route. Mechanical failures, sudden weather changes, unexplained delays, but only when seat 12 was occupied. Empty buses completed the journey without issue. Full buses with every seat except 12 arrived safely. But the moment someone sat in seat 12, Carlos drew his finger across his throat. "You can't seriously believe." "I've been here 30 years, Miguel. I've seen too much to dismiss it. The company investigated for years. They even tried using different buses, different drivers. The pattern held. Eventually, management made the decision seat 12 would always show as sold in the system for that specific route and time. The company absorbs the cost." Miguel leaned back, processing the information. "And everyone just accepts this. In 2025 inches, those who've been here long enough know better than to question it. The newer employees are told it's policy and leave it at that." Carlos finished his coffee. "Heed my advice, Miguel. Some rules exist for reasons beyond our understanding." Miguel nodded, though skepticism lingered. He'd always considered himself a practical man grounded in reality rather than folklore. But something in Carlos's eyes, a haunted certainty, gave him pause. "I will," he promised. Little did he know how soon that promise would be tested. 2 weeks later, Miguel was working the evening shift when Javier Ortiz, a recent hire like himself, slid into the seat beside him. "Hey," Javier said, voice low. "Have you heard about the Seat 12 thing?" Miguel tensed. "What about it?" "It's ridiculous, right? A company this size losing money over some ghost story." Javier laughed. "I asked around. No one can even explain why we do it. Just tradition and bad luck." "Carlos told me the history," Miguel replied carefully. "Carlos," Javier rolled his eyes. "The old man believes in witches and evil eyes, too. It's the 21st century man." "Maybe some traditions deserve respect," Miguel suggested. Javier leaned closer. "Or maybe some traditions deserve challenging. Did you know we get a commission on each ticket sold? That's money out of our pockets every night." Miguel shifted uncomfortably. "It's just one seat. One seat 7 nights a week, 52 weeks a year. Do the math." Javier stood. "Anyway, just making conversation. Back to work." As Javier walked away, Miguel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Something in his colleague's tone suggested this wasn't just idle chatter. 3 days later, Miguel was checking the booking system when he noticed something alarming. Seat 12 on the 11 p.m. Monterey route, the exact route associated with Diego's death, showed as occupied. The passenger named D. Santana. Miguel's blood ran cold. He tried to convince himself it was coincidence Santana was a common surname after all, but the initial D seemed too specific to ignore. He immediately called Carlos, who had already left for the day. "Someone sold seat 12 inches," Miguel said when Carlos answered, not bothering with greetings. Silence filled the line for several seconds. "Who?" Carlos finally asked, voice tense. "I think it was Javier. He was talking about challenging traditions a few days ago." "Find that passenger immediately," Carlos ordered. "Tell them there's been a computer error. Offer a refund, a free ticket, anything, just get them off that bus. What if they refuse? Make sure they don't. And call the driver Eduardo. Tell him to delay departure if necessary." Miguel hung up and searched for Javier, finding him at the information desk. "Did you sell seat 12 on the Monterey route?" Miguel demanded. Javier's smirk confirmed his suspicion. "Maybe. What's the big deal?" "Carlos says we need to find the passenger and get them off the bus." "Why?" "Because of some stupid superstition." Javier scoffed. "Relax, nothing's going to happen." "Who bought the ticket?" Miguel pressed. "Some guy, tall, thin, wearing a cowboy hat. Seemed to know exactly what seat he wanted." Miguel's heart skipped. "His name, Diego something. Look, the bus leaves in 20 minutes. Let it go." Miguel tried calling Eduardo but got no answer. Outside, thunder rumbled. A storm was rolling in, just like the night of the accident 30 years ago. Panic rising, he rushed to the departure area. The Monterey bus was already boarding. Miguel approached Eduardo, who was checking tickets at the door. "We need to delay," Miguel said breathlessly. "There's a problem with seat 12. Eduardo's expression darkened. "What kind of problem?" "Someone sold it. The passenger's name is D. Santana." Eduardo quickly consulted his manifest. "No one by that name on my list." "Check again," Miguel insisted. "The system shows the seat is occupied." Eduardo reviewed the list once more. "Nothing. And I've already done the head count. All passengers accounted for, no extras." "Let me see inside," Miguel pleaded. With obvious reluctance, Eduardo stepped aside. Miguel boarded the bus, eyes scanning for seat 12. It appeared empty. Relief washed over him. "See," Eduardo said behind him. "Empty. Now I need to keep to schedule." Miguel nodded, backing off the bus. The rain started falling, light at first, then heavier. As Eduardo closed the doors and the bus began pulling away, Miguel caught movement in his peripheral vision. He turned for one last look at seat 12. A man in a cowboy hat now occupied it, his gaunt face pressed against the window, eyes locked with Miguel's. A slow, unnatural smile spread across the man's face as the bus disappeared into the storm. Miguel stood frozen in the rain, unable to process what he'd witnessed. When he finally returned inside, Javier was waiting. "So end of the world," he mocked. Miguel couldn't even respond. He finished his shift in silence, unable to shake the image of that smile from his mind. At 3 a.m., his phone rang, jolting him from uneasy sleep. It was Carlos. "The bus never arrived in Monterrey," Carlos said without preamble. "No contact from Eduardo. They've lost it on tracking." Miguel sat up, fully awake now. "What do you mean, lost it?" "It disappeared from GPS near Matahuala Pass. With the storm, search and rescue can't get through until morning." "I saw him," Miguel whispered. "I checked the bus before it left. Seat 12 was empty. But as it pulled away, he was there. Cowboy hat just like you described Diego." Silence hung between them. Finally, Carlos spoke. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be difficult." Search teams found the bus at dawn, but not where anyone expected. It wasn't wrecked at the bottom of a ravine or stranded on the highway. Instead, it sat perfectly parked at a long abandoned rest stop 5 miles from Matahuala Pass. The engine was cold, as though it had been there for hours. More disturbing was what they didn't find people. The bus was completely empty, no driver, no passengers, no signs of struggle. 31 souls had vanished without a trace. But the strangest detail, the one that made national news and spawned countless conspiracy theories, was the bus itself. It wasn't the modern vehicle that had departed the previous night. It was an older model, the exact make and year as the bus that had crashed with Diego Santana 30 years earlier. In the days that followed, a massive search operation turned up nothing. Police interviews with family members revealed an unsettling pattern. None of the passengers had told anyone else about their travel plans. Many had no digital record of purchasing tickets. It was as if they had never intended to travel at all. Miguel couldn't eat or sleep. Guilt consumed him. He should have tried harder to stop the bus. When he returned to work after 3 days of administrative leave, he found a manila envelope on his desk. Inside was a faded photograph dated 1993, showing terminal staff from that era. In the front row stood a tall, thin man in a cowboy hat. The back of the photo bore a simple notation: Diego Santana, 1,965 to 1,993 inches. "Where did this come from?" Miguel asked Carlos. "Found it in the old archives," Carlos replied. "Thought you should see who you're dealing with." That evening, Miguel stayed late ostensibly to catch up on paperwork. When the terminal quieted, he made his way to the departure gate where the ill-fated bus had left. Standing in the empty space, he spoke aloud. "I know you're here, Diego. I want to understand why." The temperature dropped suddenly, condensation forming on the windows despite the summer heat outside. The digital departure board flickered, then displayed a single message: Seat 12, midnight. Miguel waited until midnight, then returned to the gate. The space where the bus should have been was empty, yet somehow he perceived a ghostly outline of a vehicle. Standing beside it was the distinct figure of a man in a cowboy hat. "You're not Diego," Miguel said, realization dawning. At least not originally. The figure smiled, that same unnatural smile Miguel had seen through the bus window. "Smart boy," it said, voice like gravel. "Diego was just the first, one of many now." "What do you want?" Miguel asked, struggling to keep his voice steady. "Companions for the journey," the entity replied. "The route is long and lonely." "The crash 30 years ago, it wasn't an accident, was it?" The figure's smile widened. "Diego discovered something he shouldn't have. About the cargo some buses carried after hours. About the people who arranged it." "Smuggling," Miguel breathed. "And they silenced him. Ricardo, too. Poor Ricardo thought he was just doing his friend a favor driving in that storm." The figure moved closer. "But death has advantages. We see everything now, including who was responsible." "Who?" Miguel asked, though part of him feared the answer. "The terminal director back then, the head of security, and the night supervisor, your mentor, Carlos." Miguel stepped back. "No, Carlos has enforced the seat 12 rule for years. He warned me. He warns everyone now. Guilt is a powerful motivator. The entity's form flickered. 30 years of watching his accomplices prosper while we remain trapped. 30 years of waiting for justice. Why tell me this? Because you saw me. Because you listened. Because now you'll help us. Before Miguel could respond, the spectral bus doors opened. The interior was filled with shadowy figures, the missing passengers from 3 days ago, and others, many others, stretching back into impossible space. "What do you want me to do?" Miguel whispered. "Bring them to us, one by one. Those who covered up the truth, those who profit from death, starting with Carlos." The terminal doors burst open. Carlos stood there, gun in hand. "Get away from him!" he shouted. The entity turned its form, expanding, darkening. "Perfect timing!" "Miguel, run!" Carlos yelled, firing at the entity. The bullets passed through harmlessly. Miguel stood frozen as the entity moved toward Carlos with unnatural speed. "You knew," Miguel said. "All these years you knew what really happened." Fear replaced the authority in Carlos's eyes. "You don't understand." "I understand enough," Miguel replied. "You helped kill Diego, you covered it up, and now you'll take his place." The entity reached Carlos, who screamed as an invisible force dragged him toward the spectral bus. He fired wildly, one bullet striking Miguel in the chest. Pain exploded through him as he fell. As consciousness faded, Miguel saw Carlos being pulled aboard the bus, saw other shadowy figures converge upon him. The last thing he heard was the entity's voice. "Now there's room for you too, Miguel. Seat 28, your lucky number." 6 months after what media called the Matehuala mystery, the San Luis Potosi bus terminal instituted a new policy. Not only would Seat 12 remain unsold on the Monterey night route, but Seat 28 would remain empty on all routes. Management cited technical reasons, but employees knew better. Javier Ortiz no longer worked there. After Miguel's death ruled an accident when his body was found alone in the terminal with Carlos's gun nearby, Javier had become increasingly erratic, claiming to see Miguel standing at empty gates, whispering about justice and final destinations. No trace of Carlos was ever found, though rumors persisted of a disheveled man matching his description, wandering the highways near Matehuala Pass during storms trying to flag down buses. On the anniversary of the original accident, local drivers refused the Monterey night route. Those passing Matehuala claimed to see a vintage bus parked at the abandoned rest stop, a tall figure in a cowboy hat beside it, and now a younger man standing at his side. In the terminal, a memorial plaque commemorates both Diego Santana and Miguel Reyes, with a peculiar warning etched below: "Respect the rules you don't understand. Some journeys have no end." Late-night cleaning staff report hearing whispers from empty buses. "Join us. There's always room for one more." Every year, another person connected to the decades-old smuggling operation disappears, often while traveling. Their families receive mysterious one-way tickets to Monterey in the mail days before, always for Seat 12 or Seat 28. Security cameras occasionally capture images of 2 men walking through the terminal after hours, one in a cowboy hat, one in a modern uniform. But when security guards investigate, they find only empty corridors and a lingering chill. Locals now tell travelers about La Curva del Diablo, the Devil's Curve near Matehuala, where a bus appears during storms driven by ghosts, collecting those who profit from others' misfortune. They say if you stand at the terminal's gate 12 at midnight and whisper Diego Santana 3 times, you'll hear the rumble of an engine that died 30 years ago. Some say if you listen closely, you'll hear Miguel's voice repeating the warning that now hangs above his memorial: "The ticket you sell may be your own." The most disturbing development came last month when a new employee discovered an anomaly in the booking system. Once a year, on the accident's anniversary, the system automatically sells 1 ticket, alternating between Seat 12 and Seat 28 to a passenger named D. Santana or M. Reyes. No one can delete these bookings. No one can modify the system to prevent them. And the most terrifying part, the passengers always show up to claim their seats. The Soul Laboratory. Carmen Vega stared in horror at the exam paper in her hands. She hadn't meant to look at it so closely. Routine administrative processing was all but the oddity had caught her eye immediately. 30 identical test papers, 30 perfect scores, and at the bottom of each one where students normally signed their names were 5 additional signatures written in handwriting that didn't match the test takers. 5 names: Maria Delgado, Javier Rojas, Ana Cortez, Felipe Nunez, and Carlos Soto. 5 students who had died in that very classroom 20 years earlier. First time seeing the miracle papers, Luisa Morales asked, peering over Carmen's shoulder. Carmen jumped, nearly dropping the stack. What is this, some kind of sick joke? Luisa, the senior administrative assistant at Preparatoria Técnica Nacional H7 in Jalisco, glanced around the office before responding. No joke. Just one of those things we don't discuss openly. Those tests were taken in Laboratory 3A, and Carmen pressed. And no one fails in Laboratory 3A, Luisa said simply. Not since the accident. It was Carmen's 3rd week at the prestigious technical high school, and already she sensed there was more beneath the institution's polished surface. She'd taken the position after transferring from another school district attracted by the higher pay and the school's reputation for excellence in chemistry, engineering, and medical technology, but no one had mentioned ghosts during her interview. What accident? Carmen asked, though something in Luisa's expression made her wonder if she really wanted to know. Luisa sighed. 2002. Gas leak during a chemistry exam. 5 students died, those 5 names you see. The school closed for months afterward. Investigation lawsuits, the works. She lowered her voice. But that's not even the strange part. When classes resumed, teachers noticed something unusual about that laboratory. Every student who takes a test there passes with a perfect score. Every single one. That's impossible, Carmen said. Statistically impossible, yet it happens without fail, Luisa interrupted. The faculty has tested it for years. Different teachers, different subjects, surprise exams with questions no one could have predicted. Always the same result. There must be an explanation, Carmen insisted. Cheating or... The administration investigated thoroughly. They installed cameras, sent in observers. Nothing. No logical explanation. Luisa touched Carmen's arm. Listen to me. There are 2 types of teachers here, those who avoid Laboratory 3A entirely, and those who use it to improve their student performance statistics. But there's a 3rd thing you should know. What's that? Carmen asked. No one stays there after dark. Ever. Luisa's expression was deadly serious. Not even the custodial staff will clean it alone. They say the chairs move by themselves. Water faucets turn on simultaneously, and there's always a lingering smell of gas, though every inspection shows the systems are perfect. Carmen would have laughed off such superstitions at her previous school. But something in Luisa's tone, a quiet certainty, gave her pause. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Because you're looking at those exams like someone who asks questions, Luisa replied. In this school, some questions are better left unasked. With that, Luisa returned to her desk, leaving Carmen to wonder what other secrets lurked within the prestigious walls of Preparatoria Técnica Nacional H7. She couldn't have known that within 6 months she would be fighting not just for her job, but for her life and for justice long denied to 5 young souls whose deaths were anything but accidental. 2 months into her position, Carmen found herself working late, finalizing grade reports for the semester. The administrative offices were quiet, most staff having left hours ago. Only the distant sound of the custodian's floor buffer broke the silence. Her mind kept returning to the perfect exams. She'd noticed a pattern. Certain teachers regularly scheduled tests in Laboratory 3A, particularly those whose subjects had historically high failure rates. The practice seemed unethical at best, yet administration turned a blind eye. Gathering her courage, Carmen decided to see this infamous laboratory for herself. The third floor was dimly lit emergency lights casting long shadows down empty corridors. She found Laboratory 3A easily enough, a standard door with a small memorial plaque beside it, listing the 5 students' names and "Forever in Our Hearts 2002 to 2022. Taking a deep breath, she tried the handle. To her surprise, it wasn't locked. The door swung open with a soft creak. The laboratory looked ordinary: lab tables arranged in rows, a fume hood along one wall, equipment cabinets, and a teacher's demonstration table at the front. Nothing suggested anything supernatural or sinister. Carmen chuckled at her own nervousness. "Just a room," she murmured, stepping inside and flipping on the lights. The fluorescents flickered twice before steadying. Carmen noticed immediately that the temperature was significantly colder than the hallway, despite the building's central air conditioning. She rubbed her arms, telling herself it was just poor climate control in an older section of the school. Moving deeper into the lab, she examined the equipment. Everything appeared modern and well-maintained, a stark contrast to her previous school's outdated facilities. The renovation had clearly been extensive. As she passed the nearest sink, the faucet suddenly turned on full blast water gushing into the basin. Carmen gasped, jumping backward. Heart pounding, she approached cautiously and turned off the tap. Faulty plumbing, she told herself, though her voice sounded unconvincing even to her own ears. Old pipes, water pressure issues. Turning away from the sink, she noticed something on the teacher's desk that hadn't been there moments before, a worn notebook with frayed edges. Hesitantly, she approached and opened it. The first page bore a simple inscription: Laboratory Journal of Carlos Soto, Advanced Chemistry. Carmen's hand trembled. Carlos Soto, one of the students who had died. The journal contained typical teenage handwriting notes on assignments, complaints about teachers' romantic musings. But toward the end, the entries took a darker turn. April 15th, 2002. Overheard something strange today. I was at my locker when I heard Principal Delgado talking to a man I didn't recognize. They were discussing cutting corners on the lab renovations. The man said no one would know they'd used substandard materials. "As long as it looks good," he said, "no one checks the gas systems. I should tell Professor Ramirez. He'll know what to do." April 20th, 2002. Tried to talk to Professor Ramirez, but he's been out sick all week. I have a bad feeling about this. Mom always says I have a sense about bad things. I smelled gas in the lab today, but no one else noticed. Final exam is Monday. I'll sit near the window just in case. The final entry made Carmen's blood run cold. April 22nd, 2002. If you're reading this, something bad happened. I'm bringing this journal to tomorrow's exam. If my instincts are right, tell everyone the truth. This wasn't an accident. Principal Delgado knew about problems with the gas lines. He and Alvarez, his construction friend, cut corners to pocket money. I tried to warn people. The remaining pages were blank. Carmen closed the journal, hands shaking. This wasn't just a tragic accident. It was criminal negligence, possibly even manslaughter. And if Carlos's journal was accurate, a cover-up at the highest levels of school administration. Suddenly, the temperature in the room plummeted. Carmen's breath came out in visible puffs of condensation. The overhead lights began to flicker rapidly. A sound behind her made her turn. All the laboratory stools simultaneously scraped across the floor, arranging themselves as if an invisible class were taking their seats for an exam. "Hello?" Carmen whispered, clutching the journal to her chest. "Is someone there?" No answer came, but when she looked toward the blackboard, she saw chalk moving by itself, writing out 2 words in sharp, angry strokes. "They know." Carmen bolted from the room, heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't stop running until she reached her car in the parking lot. Only when safely locked inside did she realize she'd taken Carlos's journal with her. She stared at the worn notebook in her lap, understanding the weight of what she now possessed, evidence of a crime that had been buried for 20 years. evidence that might finally bring justice to 5 teenagers who had died needlessly. But as she started her car, a more immediate question pressed on her mind: who were they? And what would happen when they discovered she knew their secret? The next day, Carmen called in sick. She needed time to process what she discovered and decide how to proceed. If Carlos's journal was authentic, and the supernatural events she'd witnessed suggested it was then the school administration had been covering up criminal negligence for 2 decades. She spent the morning researching the accident online. News archives provided basic details. 5 students had died when gas leaked into Laboratory 3A during a chemistry exam. The official report blamed unforeseen technical failure. Principal Delgado had resigned shortly afterward, and the school had closed for nearly 4 months during investigations and renovations. What the articles didn't mention was any suspicion of foul play or cost-cutting. The narrative had been effectively controlled: an unfortunate accident, nothing more. By afternoon, Carmen had made a decision. She needed to find Eduardo Ramirez, the teacher Carlos had mentioned in his journal. If anyone could corroborate Carlos's claims, it would be him. More internet searching revealed that Ramirez now ran a small safety consultation firm in Guadalajara, about 2 hours away. Without allowing herself to reconsider, Carmen got in her car and drove. Ramirez's office was modest, a single room above a hardware store. The man himself appeared older than his years, with premature gray hair and deep lines around his eyes. When Carmen introduced herself and explained where she worked, his expression darkened immediately. "I left that place behind 20 years ago," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "Why dig up ancient history?" Carmen placed Carlos's journal on the desk between them. "Because I don't think it's just history. I think it's an ongoing cover-up." Ramirez stared at the journal as if it might bite him. "Where did you get this?" "From Laboratory 3A last night." "That's impossible," he whispered. "All personal effects were returned to the families." "Not this," Carmen said. "And there's more. Strange things happen in that laboratory. Students who take exams there all receive perfect scores. Unexplainable phenomena: moving furniture faucets turning on by themselves." Ramirez laughed bitterly. "So they're still there, still trying to tell the truth." "Then it's true," Carmen pressed. "What Carlos wrote about the renovation, about corners being cut." Ramirez was quiet for a long moment before responding. "I wasn't a teacher, despite what Carlos wrote. I was the safety engineer contracted to inspect the renovation. I found numerous violations: substandard gas lines, improper connections, missing safety valves. I reported my findings to Principal Delgado. And he asked me to overlook them, to sign off on the safety certificate anyway." Ramirez's hands trembled slightly. "When I refused, I was fired for non-cooperation. A week later, those kids died." Carmen felt sick. "Why didn't you come forward after the accident?" "I tried. Evidence disappeared. Inspection records were altered. The investigators were pressured from above." Ramirez looked away. "And I received threats against my career, my family. I had young children then." "Who was behind it all?" Carmen asked. "Delgado." Delgado was just the public face. The real architect was his deputy, Ortega. He arranged a contract with Alvarez Construction, approved the cost-cutting, silenced the investigation. When Delgado resigned in disgrace, Ortega stepped into his position. Carmen's blood ran cold. "Ortega, as in current principal Ortega," Ramirez nodded grimly. "The very same. He built his career on those children's graves. And the strange occurrences in the lab, the perfect exam scores." "I've heard rumors over the years," Ramirez admitted. "Former colleagues say it's the spirits of those students. In life, they were victims of educational corruption. In death, they ensure no one else fails in that room." He paused. "But Carlos's note about not being the only ones, that's the most disturbing part. What does it mean?" "There was another incident 4 years earlier. a student electrocuted in the physics lab after they cut corners on the electrical system renovation. It was covered up, called a tragic accident. I only learned about it from a former engineer when I started asking questions. Carmen sat back, processing this information. So Ortega and his associates have a pattern of endangering students for profit. A pattern that's likely continued, Ramirez said. The question is, what will you do with this information? It was the question Carmen had been asking herself since finding the journal. I need more evidence. Something that directly links Ortega to the decisions that caused those deaths. Be careful, Ramirez warned. Ortega has powerful friends, people who've helped bury these incidents for decades. Carmen left with renewed determination, but also fear. She was challenging not just one man's corruption, but an entrenched system that valued money over students' lives. When she returned to work the next day, Louisa immediately pulled her aside. Ortega was asking about you, she whispered. Wanted to know why you were researching the 2002 accident. What did you tell him? That I didn't know, but Carmen, be careful. Computer logs show who accesses which files. The warning was clear. Carmen was now on Ortega's radar. That evening, after most staff had left, Carmen made a risky decision. She needed documentary evidence, something more substantial than a student's journal. She needed to search Ortega's office. The administration wing was deserted. Using her master key issued to administrative staff for after-hours work, she slipped into Ortega's office and began a systematic search. Most cabinets contained ordinary school records, but the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet yielded something interesting, a thick folder marked Renovations Personal. Inside were invoices, receipts marked Paid, with amounts far higher than the actual costs listed in a separate column, and handwritten notes about splits with Alvarez and Delgado. Most damning was a spreadsheet tracking multiple projects over more than a decade each, with savings and shares columns. Carmen photographed everything with her phone hands, trembling with adrenaline. This was the evidence she needed, proof of a corruption scheme spanning decades that had led to the deaths of at least 6 students. As she photographed the final page, she heard a key in the lock. Carmen hastily replaced the folder and looked around in panic. There was nowhere to hide. The door opened and Principal Ortega stood there, expression shifting from surprise to anger. Miss Vega, what an unexpected surprise. Carmen stood trying to project confidence despite her racing heart. I was looking for the leave request forms. In my office at 7 p.m., Ortega stepped inside, closing the door behind him. I think we need to discuss workplace boundaries. I apologize, Carmen said, moving toward the door. It won't happen again. Ortega blocked her path. I know you spoke with Ramirez. Carmen's blood froze. I don't know what you mean. His office called to confirm your appointment. A foolish mistake. Ortega moved closer. You're digging into matters that don't concern you, Miss Vega. 5 students died, Carmen said, her voice shaking. They deserve the truth. They are dead, Ortega snapped. Nothing brings them back. What I built here, this school, my career, those things are alive. I will not allow a mediocre administrative assistant to destroy everything over an accident from 20 years ago. It wasn't an accident, Carmen challenged. You knew about the gas lines. You cut corners and pocketed the money, Ortega laughed coldly. And you can prove this a dead boy's journal and a disgruntled ex-engineer. No one will believe you. What about the documents in your filing cabinet? The receipts and spreadsheets documenting every peso you stole? The confidence on Ortega's face vanished instantly. What did you find? Enough to bury you, Carmen said, feeling braver, and I've already copied it all. Ortega lunged at her face, contorted with rage. Carmen tried to dodge, but he grabbed her arm. Give me your phone, he growled. Carmen struggled to break free, but Ortega was stronger. He wrenched the phone from her hand and slammed it to the floor, stomping on it. The screen shattered. "Who do you think you are?" he hissed, gripping her wrist painfully. "You have no idea what I'm capable of." "Let me go," Carmen demanded, trying to mask her fear. "People know I'm here." "No, they don't," Ortega said, tightening his grip. "Security has gone home. It's just us now. And you're going to listen to me very carefully." At that moment, the office lights began to flicker. The temperature plummeted so rapidly that frost formed on the windows. A cacophony of sounds erupted from the hallway, the scraping of dozens of chairs across floors, slamming doors, running water. Ortega released Carmen, turning toward the door. "What the hell is that?" The noise grew louder, closer, the sound of an entire school awakening with fury. The office door flew open, and both Carmen and Ortega saw them, 5 luminous figures of the students who had died, standing with cold, determined expressions. Ortega backed away, face ashen. "Impossible!" Carlos stepped forward, raising his hand toward the whiteboard in Ortega's office. A marker floated in midair, writing in blazing red justice. Ortega screamed and lunged for the door, pushing past the apparitions. The moment he made contact with them, he collapsed, convulsing and gasping as if inhaling something toxic. "Help me," he wheezed, looking up at Carmen with pleading eyes. "They're killing me." Carmen stood frozen, too shocked to react as Ortega continued to writhe on the floor. Carlos turned to her, and a voice echoed in her mind, "Justice or mercy, your choice." Carmen looked into Carlos's eyes, then down at the struggling Ortega. With shaking hands, she pulled out her backup phone from her jacket pocket and called emergency services. 1 year later, Carmen stood before Laboratory 3A, now completely renovated and renamed the Delgado Rojas Cortez Núñez Soto Memorial Laboratory. A new bronze plaque on the wall told the true story of their deaths and how justice had finally been served. Ortega had survived his cardiac arrest, only to face charges of corruption, embezzlement, and negligent homicide. Alvarez, too, had been charged. Delgado, who had been living in seclusion since his resignation, committed suicide when police came to his home. The families of the deceased students received compensation, though nothing could replace what they'd lost. Thanks to the evidence Carmen had gathered and Ramirez's testimony, the case was resolved quickly. The greed of 3 men had cost 5 young lives and nearly many more. As Carmen looked into the empty laboratory, she reflected on the strange phenomena that had occurred there. The perfect exam scores had ceased. No more moving chairs or self-activating faucets. No more unnatural cold. Carmen placed a small bouquet beneath the plaque and whispered, "Thank you." As she turned to leave, she caught her reflection in the laboratory window. But not just her reflection. 5 young faces smiled beside her, then faded like morning mist in sunlight. Carmen had learned that not all tests have answers in textbooks. Sometimes the most important lessons come from listening to voices that can no longer speak. And sometimes the perfect score is simply truth. As she walked away, she didn't notice the numbers appearing on the blackboard, the 28th of September, 2025. A date yet to come. A reminder that while some spirits had found peace, other secrets still waited to be uncovered in the old halls of Preparatoria Técnica Nacional #7. The school continued as always, but now with an unofficial tradition. Students would visit the memorial laboratory before difficult exams, leaving small offerings and whispering thanks to Los Cinco, the 5 students who ensured no one would ever fail in that room again, not through supernatural intervention, but through the living legacy of accountability their deaths had finally achieved. And on quiet nights, custodians still occasionally report hearing the scratch of pencils on paper when the laboratory is empty, and 5 signatures appearing momentarily on the attendance sheet before fading away, a reminder that some lessons continue even after the final bell has rung.